Let's start with one of the biggest issues this election, which is immigration. Do you support President Biden's executive order that blocks migrants' access to asylum when the illegal border crossings exceed 2,500 a day?
I absolutely support the current administration's restrictions. I mean, we have to cap the level at a reasonable, manageable number, and so yes, ma'am.
Should there be any pathway to citizenship, do you think, for those who are currently in the country illegally?
I definitely believe we need to, and know we need to expand the work visa programs. The ranchers and the industry leaders in the packing industry, for instance, out in the 4th Congressional District have been telling me directly that they want a more dependable workforce, and so extended work visa programs and a pathway to citizenship for those that are here, that are employed, that are paying taxes into our system. Absolutely.
What do you think the responsibility of the federal government is to support all the migrants that have been coming here?
Well, I definitely think the federal government has to play a role, especially in cities like Denver, where we've seen 40,000 plus immigrants coming in terms of financial assets and what those communities need to sufficiently, support those individuals as they join the workforce and the communities abroad. So I think that financial assets are definitely a good place to start.
What more should be done to secure the border, if anything, do you think?
Well, I definitely think that we need a functional Congress that's going to pass a comprehensive immigration bill, like my opponent and her colleagues in Congress voted down for partisan political reasons. We need a functional Congress that's willing to do the work across the aisle to compromise and pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill so that we have a secure border and country.
In terms of specifically securing the border, would you build a wall? Would you add more agents? What in particular?
I would definitely add more agents, more funding for more, border enforcement agents. I would definitely, like I mentioned, add funding for judges and also add funding for administrative personnel to properly process everyone that arrives in a legal form and fashion, and to invest in the high-tech mitigation of illegal immigration, which the border enforcement bill that was on the floor in the House would have done. So I think we need to surge funding for administrative personnel and for high-tech enforcement and mitigation of illegal immigration.
Thanks. Former President Trump thinks the military should be deployed to go after the Mexican drug cartels. Do you agree?
I would disagree. I think we need to ensure that our military forces are focused on geostrategic international threats to our security. And I believe that the states and the Border Enforcement Agency should be tasked with, ensuring the security of our border, which I think they can do if they're properly funded and staffed.
Okay. I'm going to switch subjects and talk about the economy. The national debt is nearly $35 trillion. So where does deficit reduction fit into your policy priorities?
Yeah, I absolutely believe in a fiscally responsible and a balanced budget and a system that's functional. It has to be balanced. As we all know, with our own pocketbooks at home, we have to balance our own budgets and pay our mortgages. The national debt, I think, is definitely a threat to our children's future and to the solvency of our country. And so it needs to be addressed. We definitely need to increase federal revenue in order to actually start to pay down that debt and make sure that we're spending responsibly. However, I think the main fixer for this problem is to have a fair tax code that closes loopholes, that requires multi-billion-dollar international corporations and the super rich to pay their fair share into the tax system. Every single other advanced westernized country in the world taxes their billionaires at 50 to 55%. We don't tax ours at all. And so I think we need simply to close loopholes and pass a fair, comprehensive tax code that'll actually provide the revenue that we need in the system to keep Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid solvent, to pay down the national debt and deficit.
So you mentioned the tax code. The 2017 tax cuts expire, as you probably know, in 2025. Do you support extending any of those?
I do not support extending those tax cuts, especially not for the multi-billion-dollar corporations who right now those tax cuts are not expiring on. The problem is we have a very corrupt tax code. The tax cuts are expiring on all of the blue-collar working-class American citizens while they're not expiring on these major billion-dollar corporations. We need to fix that.
Do you support any new tax credits?
I do, especially for first-time home buyers, because it's becoming less and less feasible for the American working-class citizen to afford a housing or to purchase a first home. And so I do think we need to look into those types of programs to assist that process.
How do you pay for those?
Right, and we need to, like I said, we need to scrap the cap in order to fund, fully fund a solvent Social Security program. We also need a Wall Street transaction tax. I think we need a wealth tax in order to fund programs like subsidies assistance programs for our farming and ranching communities who have seen the price of fertilizer and equipment repair skyrocket since the wars in Ukraine started. So these problems are more broad than I think that they're talked about in a lot of ways, and that we could, with a very specific fair tax code, we could fund a lot of these programs. They're completely affordable. We just need to make sure that we have a fair tax code that supports that.
Politicians often cite eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse as a way to reduce the deficit. Are there any federal programs or agencies that you would consider cutting?
I wouldn't, if fraud, waste, and abuse is happening, absolutely we can examine it and consider cutting those programs. I don't think we need to cut the current federal programs. In fact, in a lot of ways, I think we need to expand them, and we need to expand the federal government's role in the expansion and investment in broad infrastructure establishment and installations across the country, and that would do a lot to raise the bar and increase competition in the free market systems. And that's been done many times in our past throughout the New Deal era with the Civilian Conservation Corps. And a good friend of mine, Congressman Neguse, has stood up the Climate Conservation Corps, which needs to be fully funded and expanded so that we can have a broad carbon sequestration programs being funded and orchestrated at the federal level to address the environmental crisis and create a lot of good paying jobs at the same time.
And you indicated you support a balanced budget. You would support a constitutional balanced budget amendment then?
I would definitely support a balanced budget at the federal level, yes ma'am.
You touched on Social Security and Medicare, and the latest trustees report says that Social Security will be insolvent by 2035, Medicare by 2036, and the trustees say in order to keep the program solvent, either revenues need to increase by an amount equal to a permanent payroll tax increase of 3.3%, or the benefits need to be permanently reduced for all current and future beneficiaries by nearly 21%, or a combination of the two. Do you support a payroll tax increase or a reduction in benefits?
I don't support a reduction in benefits. I do support a revision in the funding systems and removing the income cap that is currently in place for Social Security, yes ma'am, in order to make that system solvent.
And
yes.
You're talking about the amount of income that's taxed for Social Security?
Yes, ma'am. So above, say, $250,000, your income is not taxed for the Social Security system. I think we should remove that cap so that everyone's income above that, all the way up to any level, is taxed and funds our Social Security system, because I think that our seniors deserve, to live their lives with dignity.
What about means testing Social Security? So having it based on need or the amount of assets that a person has?
I would agree with examining programs that would actually, curtail the amount of benefits available to those who are much well off than others. Yes, ma'am.
So, should the retirement age, do you think, be raised?
No.
Switching gears, the Farm Bill. Farming is very important, as you know,
Absolutely.
in CD4, and Congress is currently negotiating a new 5-year Farm Bill. 73% of the bill is about food stamps. Do you think that farming and food stamps should be under separate bills?
I don't. I think that they can be, competently administered under the same bill. And, I think that programs like that are critical for our country and for our values, our shared values. I don't know if you know, but when I was 2, my parents divorced. And, we lived with my mom, and we were on welfare and food stamps and free meals at school. And it was those programs like welfare and food stamps and free food at school that funded by the federal government that actually gave my mom the ability to lift herself up by her bootstraps and, get our family back on our feet. And, she was able to finish her college degree in nursing and gain a commission in the United States Air Force. And that changed our lives very significantly. So I think it's important for programs like beef sticks for kids that's funded by the Farm Bill that puts beef sticks in lunch boxes of hungry kids. That I think that's extremely important that is definitely administered. So I think the Farm Bill is a good place to do that.
So the Farm Bill that passed the House Ag Committee would result in a nearly $30 billion reduction in SNAP benefits over the next 10 years. I take it you don't support that?
No, ma'am. I think that we can definitely, working across the aisle, find the ways and means to fund those programs.
The Ag Committee also approved an amendment to the Farm Bill that would close a loophole in the 2018 law that allowed for intoxicating hemp dry products like Delta-8 THC. Do you support closing that loophole? It would impact hemp farmers in Colorado, some of them.
I don't support closing loopholes that would directly impact the ag community in Colorado, so we would have to be very careful about what measures we support and about how they're going to impact Colorado farms and the ag community and access to water. There's a lot of different issues that are affected by those things, so I would not support closing those loopholes right now.
The Justice Department reclassified marijuana as Schedule III. Do you support that, and should it be removed from the Controlled Substances Act altogether?
I think that it should, and I definitely support, a federal legalization now, and, very specifically because it does help a lot of combat veterans, as we've seen throughout many conflicts, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and I fundamentally do not believe that any state in the union should be putting a veteran behind bars for consuming a plant that helps them with their PTSD or with their chronic pain from combat injuries that they received in service of our country. And so I support a federal legalization now, a decriminalization and expungement of non-violent crimes that were related only to marijuana products.
Healthcare spending is projected to rise faster than any other federal government program over the next few decades, and it's already a quarter of the budget. How would you curb healthcare spending while maintaining or even improving healthcare?
Yeah, well, I support, taking steps towards a single-payer, Medicare for all healthcare system because it's the most financially responsible system that provides care to all of our citizens, and I believe that health care is a human right. I think that we need to make sure that we're doing everything in the meantime as we work towards that in-state objective goal to reduce the cost of prescription medications, to ensure that we're able to, bring medications in from other, countries like Canada, and so that there is actually a competitive market. The problem in the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, the problem in the packing plant industry is that there's massive monopolization and price gouging going on, and unfortunately, consumers are bearing the burden of that. And I think that we need at the federal level some significant consumer financial protections, and we also need to make sure that our medical industry is being driven by patients' needs, not profits.
Access to health care is a big problem in rural Colorado,
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
where there are 43 rural hospitals and half of them are in the red. CEOs say they can't get loans from banks because they see them as risk. Should the federal government help, and if so, how?
I do think we should expand funding for our rural hospitals specifically, and not just in the way of funding for infrastructure, but in ensuring that there are programs in place for nurses that incentivize them in remaining in rural communities where they oftentimes can't even afford a house based on their income. So I do think the federal government has a role to play in ensuring that adequate funding is present so that in places like Lamar, Colorado, you don't have to drive an hour and 10 minutes to get to a labor and delivery unit. Because I don't think that any Coloradan or American citizen should be stuck on the side of the road giving birth. They should have access to those. And in the richest country on earth, there's absolutely no reason why every American citizen should not have access to the highest quality health care in the world. And that's, I think, a moral obligation and position that I take.
Another big issue in the district and really statewide is water. Years ago, Thornton bought up farms around northern Colorado and is now cashing in on the water rights. Douglas County has tried buying water from the San Luis Valley. Do you support urban areas taking water from rural parts of the state?
I don't, and I think that we need to make sure that our natural watersheds are being supported and protected, and while at the same time ensuring that the agricultural community has access to the water resources that they need. And I think that means standing up smart watering programs in the ag community and ensuring that we have federal investment in Colorado Congressional District 4 in smart water storage and distribution systems, especially for places like Morgan County, where the soil actually has uranium contamination, and so that is leaching into the water. We need federal investment in compartmentalized storage and water distribution and piping out to those areas, and to support our agricultural communities. So I definitely think there's a role for us to play, and that to work in close concert with our county commissioners and ensure that our rural communities as well as our expanding urban areas have the water that they need, and there's smart water production and storage means to actually fill those gaps, and so I don't support taking water from our rural and agricultural communities. We need to find ways and means of providing that for our expanding urban communities.
We talked earlier about tax credits. Do you support additional tax credits for renewable energy? And if so, how would you pay for those?
I would support additional tax credits for renewable energy. At the same time, I would want to, kind of use the existing subsidy system and benefit system that subsidizes, fossil fuel exploration and production as leverage to push, companies in the correct direction with respect to transition, while protecting workers' rights and livelihood. The coal miners out in Craig, Colorado were left behind when natural gas became more lucrative to produce. We need to make sure that same thing doesn't happen, and I think we need to write into a federal energy production bill protections for workers currently in the industry, while at the same time using the subsidy system to leverage the existing companies in the right direction. That doesn't mean we're going to stop producing fossil fuels right away, of course, because 80% of our energy still comes from fossil fuels. We need to acknowledge that and start taking steps towards making sure that workers' rights are supported and that energy production is moving in the right direction in Colorado and in our country.
So you do not support a ban on oil and gas drilling?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Okay. Do you support any new gun control laws?
I absolutely would work directly across the aisle on supporting a National Safe Storage Act, and I'll tell you why. Because my son was in class at STEM Highlands Ranch the day that the shooting occurred there. I was working in a campaign office, actually. I got a text message on my phone. It buzzed, and I looked down, and it said, "Shots fired, STEM Highlands Ranch. Stay out of the area." And all I could do is drive towards that area because I knew my son was in that school. And being a combat veteran, I've seen what these weapons can do. And for 2 hours, I didn't know if my son was a victim or not. He wound up, thank God, not being. But a kid I did know, Kendrick Castillo, lost his life tragically there that day. And it's specifically, because those weapons were just simply stored in the wrong manner. They were in a glass case, right? And so if we passed a Safe Storage Act with a subsidy for every gun owner to have a proper biometric capable safe, it would immediately, and made safe storage the law, it would immediately make it impossible for kids in a home to accidentally get a hold of a firearm and tragically shoot themselves or others, and God forbid, carry those weapons to a school. And so I think that we could get a bill like that passed in a bipartisan fashion. And so I want to take steps in the right direction and work across the aisle and absolutely pursue responsible, common sense gun control.
What about a red flag law at the federal level?
I would support a red flag law, yes, ma'am.
Let's talk some foreign affairs. Should the federal government do more, less to help Israel? And what about the Palestinians?
I believe that in that very complex situation, and I have family in Tel Aviv, but that the in-state objective needs to be one where there's a two-state solution, a demilitarized zone, so that the cycle of violence doesn't continue, where the Palestinians and the Israelis, have confidence in their security and have, the rights that every citizen of humanity deserves, in my opinion. So I think that's the objective in-state. In order to get there, we definitely have to address, the Iranian-funded terrorist militias and armies that exist around Israel and the threats that they pose, and how to get to a point where we have established an international demilitarized zone around Israel, I think is the best way to go about achieving that. Should
the U.S. send troops to Taiwan if it's attacked by China?
Absolutely. They are our allies. They're a democratically elected country. We should stick with our ironclad commitment to the defense of Israel, of Ukraine, and of Taiwan.
How would you rate President Joe Biden's performance?
Well, I would just look at the legislation that's been passed. And I think that there's been a lot of progress that's been made on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act that's brought, 2 million advanced manufacturing jobs and rare earth mineral asset exploration back to the United States.
Would you have preferred a Democratic candidate other than President Biden this year?
I would prefer that we have an honest president, regardless of whether they're an independent, a Democrat, a Republican, someone that we can trust in office that's going to work hard for the American people, that stands on the podium, that tells you the truth.
Is that President
That's
Biden?
President Joe Biden, yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Lastly, how do you win in a district like this? That you've run in twice before.
Yes.
And, it is certainly overwhelmingly Republican.
It is, but it's also overwhelmingly American. And I think that regardless of our affiliation, Republican, unaffiliated, Democrat, Green Party, that our foundation is American. And I believe and I know that showing up and having face-to-face conversations with Democrats, Republicans, and Independents or unaffiliated, and talking to them about the issues that their communities face and the challenges that their communities face, and conveying the message that I genuinely care about them, that I genuinely care about their communities, their schools, their businesses, their livelihood, and the security of our country and our Constitution that I swore to support and defend on multiple occasions against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, to take that obligation freely with no mental reservations or purposes of evasion, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I was about to enter, so help me God. That oath to our Constitution, it doesn't have an expiration date. And from my perspective, that oath to our Constitution is also an oath to my fellow American citizens, every single citizen of District 4, regardless of their affiliation. And so I will continue to advocate and fight for our district, our communities, and our country, because I care deeply about them. And I care deeply about the American dream that I want available for my kids. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.